Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to be exploring the concept of using tactical flashlights for battlefield applications or for general self-defense applications. And for this discussion, which is going to be a historical discussion and also talking about some general ideas that you might want to consider when choosing a flashlight, because there are thousands of flashlight reviews on YouTube, but there aren't very many that tell you why you might need a certain type of flashlight. So I hope to achieve that in this video, but I am going to be using the Thrunite TN36UT today in order to demonstrate the high point of flashlight technology as it stands today at the end of 2015. So let's get to it. So in the United States, there's a lot of states that permit concealed carry. You're allowed to carry pepper spray and probably a lot of other personal defense devices which are basically prohibited in Canada. So we're limited in terms of our on-person carry self-defense. So we have to kind of improvise and use what's available to us. And light is one of those force multipliers, particularly nowadays with the high-powered Cree LED lights at home or outdoors, and it takes little expertise to really use one effectively, at least in terms of turning it on and flashing someone in the eyes. Of course, after that, what you do with it, there is some technique and skill that's involved in deterring any further escalation of the aggression. Now, in terms of the history of using the flashlight in combat, it's safe to say now that in a lot of instances it's obsolete due to night vision and thermal vision, thermal imaging. And that's mostly for military applications, but there are some civilians who are privy to that technology as well. However, light can still be used effectively, perhaps in a more primitive warfare arena. So interestingly enough, in the Vietnam War, there was a period of time where they tested out this device called the ambush light. Now, night raids were a common occurrence during the Vietnam War, and many Americans and Vietnamese lost their lives in these nighttime firefights. And commonly they use flares in order to illuminate the battlefield to see the enemy's location. Unfortunately, that had the effect of also giving away the friendly fire location. So the strategy there was to simultaneously start attacking while illuminating the area to add to this stun or shock factor. And sometimes they even use tripwire flares to signal and reveal the enemy's location. Of course, these required time to set and they weren't always accurate. So because of the double-edged sword in using flares, they tested out some prototypes in order to mitigate this issue. Now, the first prototypes were electric incandescent lights and they were powered by 15D batteries. These would run for about 15 minutes, but most of them failed due to the climate of the Vietnam jungle and just not being ruggedized for the humidity, and they were heavy and they were awkward to carry. I think they weighed in at about 5 pounds. So this prompted the creation of what they called the ambush light, which was a very bright flare, and it was encased in a very large reflector that would project this cone of artificial sunlight at the enemy. Now, this allowed for blinding illumination, at least for part of the battlefield, while not entirely having to concede your own location. So it was estimated that this light was somewhere in the tune of 125,000 candle power, but it too was plagued with a bunch of issues, and eventually I think only a few hundred of these ever seen combat. Apparently the platoons or squads who used them still wanted them, but the demand was diminished, and of course after the war ended, there was no need for them anymore, at least not in that arena. And soon after that, night vision and thermal imaging came along, rendering it pretty much obsolete. This is typically quite high priced and not affordable to the average prepper or civilian, and because it's more technologically sophisticated, it's more likely to fail. Now, there are some troops and police forces that use these LED incapacitors and dazzler lights to disorient people. It's a newer technology, and of course it's difficult for civilians to get their hands on it, and it's very expensive. So the average Joe's most cost-effective, less than lethal self-defense tool when it comes to light is still the high-powered LEDs, which are, as we see, continuously evolving almost at a rate of 100% a year since 2010. Now, to get an understanding of just how far flashlight technology has come in the last 10 years, if you go back and you look at one of those old Maglite incandescent flashlights, the big D battery suckers, 19 lumens, I think, is what those things would put out. They weighed about a pound. They would throw very far, so they would throw about 750 feet. But because the light output was so poor, it's not like you're going to see that from that distance anyways. And so basically these things would run for about 10 hours. They put out 19 lumens. Now let's fast forward to the future and look at the Thrunite TN36 UT. We can compare it using its medium mode, which is at 850 lumens. It maxes out at 7300 lumens, but if we compare its 567 minute runtime, which is pretty much the equivalent of 10 hours at 850 lumens, it's going to equal a whopping 43 times more efficiency than the incandescent bulb. It's the same weight, it's a smaller form factor, the bulbs are going to last a hell of a lot longer. They're IPX8 rated, most of these lights nowadays, not just the Thrunite light, but most of these anodized aluminum flashlights, they're built tougher, the bulbs can handle more abuse. Now if you think about the turbo mode on the TN36, now it's only going to run, I think, for about 90 minutes on full-blown turbo, which is 7300 lumens, which is diffuse in a floodlight, and that is going to basically be about 384 times brighter than the Maglite. So it's just astounding how far we've come with regards to technology. And really right now we're only limited by the amount of energy that our batteries can output. So once they make another leap in battery technology, it's going to get even brighter. I wouldn't be surprised that within 2 years 5,000 plus lumen flashlights are going to be the norm, and 10,000 lumen output flashlights are going to be very affordable. And of course, with this, we've seen an improvement in candela, what used to be called candle power. Now you're seeing these throwing flashlights which just emit an incredible peak beam intensity. The Thrunite TN36 itself has 20,000 candle power, which is very significant, more than enough to blind somebody at 20 feet away easily, and probably a lot further away, but that's going to be, you know, the range when it's probably going to be most effective. And of course, if we're talking about grid down SHTF WRL, you're going to be seeing a regression in terms of battlefield technology, which may well take us back a couple decades in the very least with respect to military capabilities. So something like this, using a bright, powerful light to immediately stun the enemy in the thick of darkness, could actually be very useful. So where does the Thrunite TN36 come into play then? Where does it find its place in this post-collapse tactical arena? Well, for one, the great thing about this light is that if you were searching for something that was within, say, a couple hundred meters, this thing is going to light up everything. So if somebody's hiding in the bushes, you're going to have to survey the area in a very systematic manner in order to make sure that you've covered the whole scene and that you've seen everything you need to see. Whereas a Thrunite TN36 UT, at the flick of a switch, you see everything at once. It's just that bright. It just throws light on every part of the scene, and it really is a nice equal diffusion of that light. And because the lumen count of this flashlight is so high, the candela is very high in spite of it being a floodlight. So in part 2 of this series, I'm going to be exploring the specifics of why it's advantageous to use light for self-defense and tactical purposes. I'm also going to be exploring the many factors that you want to take into consideration when choosing a flashlight for self-defense purposes. So stay tuned for that.
Check out the Canadian Preppers Network blog, an excellent resource for survivalists and preppers.